All right. Hi, folks. The name of my talk is Pitfalls and Upgrading, Case Study and Upgrading from Dunfell to Kirkstone and Beyond. And I know a lot of folks are going, Dunfell, Kirkstone, why are we talking about that? And someone brought it up in the chat earlier, and a lot of times we end up having to do this upgrade, especially like if you're this your first time doing the Yocto project, sometimes your boss will say, "Hey, we have this thing that we need upgraded from Dunfell to Kirkstone. Let's go do this." And this is how you learn. A little bit about me. I'm a longtime Yocto project contributor and ambassador. I'm best known for making silly Yocto Project demos. So the Yocto Project DJ set, the Yocto Project Blimp, the Yocto Project Hurdy-Gurdy. Basically, if it's something that Linux Foundation could say, hey, that's too loud, I'm the one who makes it. I currently work for Bay Libra and I do mostly Yocto Project things, but Bay Libra does a lot more. They do kernel development, compilers, Zephyr, Yocto, Android. I want to send a special thanks to Span.io. They're the folks that this upgrade was about. A lot of times when you're a contractor or consultant, you don't necessarily get to talk about the work that you've done for your clients. Some of the Span folks are here and they let me talk about this, which I really, really thank them for. They're excellent people. They make smart home electric panels, and you should. One of my colleagues from Span is talking later on, I think tomorrow. His name's Cornelius, and he's talking about Rust build. So you should definitely go to that talk. One of the things that I want to note about this talk is I like to talk about failing. I don't like to talk about how things go correctly because then you could just read the manual. I like to talk about when things go bad and how to fail and correct and get out of messes that you've created for yourself or other people have created for you. So let's talk about the upgrade first. On the right there is one of the span panels, and they have a very complex Dunfell build system. It's mostly IMX 8mm based systems with multiple image flavors. So you have dev, test, manufacturer, and a very large mostly Rust multi-project repo that many recipes used, and it's Git submodules all the way down. It's insane. I happen to love Git submodules, but it's kind of awesome and crazy. Um, it also uses Mender OTA. Now, there is one rule with doing this upgrade. You cannot brick any of these devices. So there is zero bricking, not 0.001% can fail. There's zero bricking allowed. So because main reason is if you have boot, your house circuit panel bad things, very expensive things happen. So we're doing this upgrade and nothing's going to break, hopefully. So let's talk about the image layout. So this uses what's called the Toradex Tezzy Tarball, and this Toradex makes this easy installer, which let me tell you, if you've worked with Easy Installer is kind of cool. But make it easy on yourself and set up remote image repos, or else you're going to be pulling USB keys constantly. Um, Definitely do this. Trust me, you will save yourself like 10 minutes every time you need to reinstall an image. Within the Tezzy tarball, there's some JSON, there's some other things, but the two things that we're really concerned about here is this GPT image, which has 5 partitions. There's a kernel overlays, device tree partition, there's a read-only data partition, there's the Mender rootfs AB flip-flop partitions, and then there's a writable data partition. And then one of the things in there is this thing called IMX boot. And we're going to talk about this later because this is the bootloader container. And this is where this upgrade really came into pain. So let's talk about Dunfell to Kirkstone upgrades. And there's like really 4 major things that we talk about when we do a Dunfell to Kirkstone. There's some variable changes that have been renamed to do inclusive language. Some of them have been deleted, some just get renamed. There's some fetcher changes. Git and Git submodule branches are required. Anything that's using GitHub, there's a whole Git support issue. There's also license changes. So we've changed license format to more accurately resemble SPDX. But the big one, which actually came in Honister, is the override syntax changes. So like underscore appends becomes colon appends, underscore prepend, et cetera, et cetera. So like if you've ever done a Dunfell to Kirkstone upgrade, you've seen all of this. So let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good, most of this upgrade has a convert script in OE core scripts contrib. So there's convert source URI, convert overrides, etc. And this actually gets us a good chunk of the way through the migration, at least some of the scut work. The bad is some of the overrides aren't going to get picked up. And this is very specific to machine specific overrides. So if you run that convert script, it's going to pick up source URI, append, underscore Verdin IMX8MM, and that's just wrong. So you have to kind of go through there. And since Joseph's here and I have to troll Joseph a little bit, some variables do get picked up that shouldn't be. I spent 20 minutes tracking this down. So I ran
Send me
my
an
override.
invoice.
I'm going to send you an invoice. I ran my convert script and it's great. And then everything blows up on the build because there's a variable called mpart append in Mender that gets converted that really shouldn't get converted. So don't name your stuff this unless you have to. Um, and then there's the annoying. And this is what this talk is about. Sometimes the problem is actually you. But the big problem that we had that was just really annoying is that big mono repo that's used by like 60 or 70 recipes, that submodules all the way down. Well, there was an addition to Bitbake that throws a non-configurable logger warning. You can't turn it off unless you have to go hack around Bitbake. That says submodules included by this refers to a relative SSH relative reference, blah, blah, blah. So this is great. This should be in there. The problem is that you get a lot of BB warn spam when you have 60 or 70 recipes that use a repository with 10 or 12 submodules. So you end up getting a lot of BB warn spam and you end up missing things. So fix as much of the BB warn spam as possible as quickly as you can because you're going to miss errors. Um, so you'd think that you're done by that. Well, no, you're not. Now you have to do recipe migration. This is what comes into a lot of this is very human oriented. So if meta my layer is carrying food 2.3, because Dunfell was carrying food 2.0, Kirkstone's on 2.5. You have to decide now whether I want to move to 2.5. Sometimes there's a reason why developers peg to a certain revision. Sometimes you want the latest and greatest. So a lot of this is tracking people down and finding out, hey, can we move this? This gets more complex if Kirkstone and your layer have the same package version. Let's say you're both carrying 2.5, and this is especially more complex if the recipes are substantially different. So it may just be people just built it differently, but sometimes that gets into issues and you kind of need to work that out. And then patch migration. Most of this is like we all know how to migrate patches. It's tedious but solved. But the issue comes in when something upstream has changed dramatically, like there's been architectural changes, like we had this with Network Manager. But also if you're carrying a patch that adds something and it never got upstreamed, and then someone goes and upstreams it with a different solution, then you have to kind of rectify this. So the simplest way to fix this is upstream first. And I'm going to say upstream first a lot in this because a lot of the issues that you run into this, especially with patch migration, could have been solved by just upstreaming. Okay, so you've migrated all the recipes, you've done all the converts, you've done all this, and it successfully builds, and you boot secondary programmer loads, and it loads the GDR firmware, and it goes into normal boot, and boom, boot. Okay, why is this not booting? So this is where 2 months of hell starts. So there could be a number of issues here. One of the issues is the vendor's BSP new boot, U-boot version doing something silly? Am I doing something silly? Is something wrong in my machine config? Is Mender doing something silly? Not that Mender would be doing something silly, Joseph, but sometimes you never know. Anything that's touching that bootloader, you got to look at. Is it something about the ROM not loading the new U-boot right? And the thing to remember here is you don't get console until SPL, so that's going to be hard to debug. Or if it's a little bit from column A and a little bit from column B, something I'm doing that's all over the place. So you need to start tracking that down. The first place you track it down is with look at the new U-boot version. So I looked at the new U-boot version and, oh, here's a commit that's a problem. We're going to update the environment memory layout. And we're going to change load addresses and flatten device tree addresses and change the size. Well, there's a problem here. And the problem is I have a lot of deployed devices with the old memory layout. So this leaves us with not a lot of great choices. We could carry two U-boot versions with two different memory layouts. We can update U-boot SPL and U-boot initial via Mender. We can revert the patch and have two U-boot versions with the same memory layout, or we can vote forward port old U-boot. So when going through this kind of decision tree, we have to remember the one commandment. Thou shalt not prick deployed devices. So this is a problem. So if we go with two U-boot versions with two memory layouts, it's kind of a maintenance pain, but there also could be a possible problem exist between keyboard and chair and you brick a device. Now, hopefully QA is going to catch it, but you want to minimize the possibility of doing that. So Mender can support U-boot updates, but you have to build a custom update module. OTA is black magic sometimes, and you really need a lot of testing for it. And if you get a power outage or a bad block during the initial update, you brick the device. Okay, so I'll just revert the commit. Well, again, I'm carrying two different versions of U-boot. This is a maintenance pain in the arse. But if someone goes and changes that memory layout again and that doesn't get caught, then again, I'm back in the same place where I could possibly brick the device. Okay, fine. So what we're going to do is we're just going to forward the old U-boot recipes, and this will be a problem for later. Yeah, okay. So there's U-boot within the vendor BSP layer. So what we're going to do is we're going to check out the Dunfell branch. We're going to bring that over. We're going to convert it over to Kirkstone and make sure all the load addresses are correct. Make sure it's all correct in my machine config. Make sure all the vendor stuff applies. And it builds, yes. And does it boot? No, no boot. And again, we go where the secondary program loader loads up the memory firmware, goes into normal boot, trying to boot, and just sits there and hangs. So why? So now I need to start digging into the secondary program loader. So I had assumed that I was doing something wrong with my U-boot variables. I spent a long time looking at this. Maybe Mender's overwriting something. Maybe it's the U-boot environment. Okay, let's start diffing U-boot environments. Or really, maybe I should just read the docs and understand how the IMX8MM boot process works instead of just assuming that I know how. Worried about the Toradex IMX boot process. They use something called boot container. Binary U-boot bin is necessary for the final boot container. This binary boot container takes the DDR firmware, ARM trusted firmware, U-boot secondary program loader, U-boot initial, and U-boot device tree and packages it all up. And how does this look? Well, this is the boot flow. So the boot ROM goes and loads up this boot container that they call and loads up the secondary program loader. That loads up the DDR firmware, which goes and loads up a fit image, which has ARM trusted firmware, as well as an optionally opt-t and then initial boot U-boot, which goes and then loads up kernel. So in my case, somewhere where that blue arrow, something's happening. I'm getting SPL. I'm getting the DDR firmware loaded, but it's not hitting that fit image. So this it that we have this boot container. Fit image has U-boot initial, device tree, ATF, opt, U-boot SPLs going, DDR. Who creates this flash.bin, which is what it's named? Well, it's created by two recipes, IMX boot 1.0 and IMX make image 1.0. These are in meta freescale, but there are also like a lot of BSPs, BB append to them. And it has the same package version as Dunfell, so I don't see why the boot container is not getting built correctly. Does anyone see where I'm going with this? If so, shout it out. So I got real frustrated and I decided, okay, I have an image that builds and I have an image that doesn't build. Or I have an image that boots, that builds and boots, and an image that builds but doesn't boot. So I'm going to take things apart and start moving things over. So I did a diff on U-boot out. The diff was minor, replace that, boots. I did a diff on rootfs. Rootfs is almost exactly the same. Move it over, it boots. U-boot env boots. IMX boot, things blow up. So wait a minute here. It's somewhere within IMX boot and it's somewhere within those two recipes that something's going wrong. Let's go take a look at that. And I started taking a look at those, and I noticed that the Dunfell and Kirkstone hashes were wrong. They were different. The hashes between the two recipes were different. IMX boot is actually closer to IMX boot underscore 5.1.571. I gave this talk to a friend of mine who's in library science, and he's not technical at all. And he said, "So wait a second, this was a versioning issue." Yeah, it's a versioning issue. I do have a patch for this for Meta Freescale. These really should be named something other than 1.0. There's version numbers there. They should be named that. But the problem is you have a lot of BSP vendors who are BB appending to these, and the second you change this, you have to kind of alert them. So I have a patch for it. I haven't sent it out yet. I'm still kind of thinking about some things, but please do not name your recipes 1.0 unless they are actually 1.0. Just give them actual version numbers, please. Because like this was an easy fix that I should not have had to spend that long on. Um, so yes. Oh, look, changes in IMX boot, IMX ATF, all of these things. So it would be really nice if those version recipes were versioned right. So what we're going to do is we're going to forward port the rest of the boot container, not just U-boot. So forward port IMX boot, IMX ATF, IMX MADIC image. And the results are it builds clean, it flashes clean, has the old memory layout, has the old U-boot environment, and it boots. So this means we're done with our upgrade, right? No, absolutely not. So, especially when you're doing OTA with stuff that cannot fail, you need to test. So, can I do an OTA from Dunfell to Kirkstone? Can I go back? Can I do a Kirkstone, and fall back to Dunfell? You want to test the living daylights at it. Does this break any other machines or images in the layout layers? And there's a talk later on called Leveraging Dynamic Layers in the Yocto Project. I suggest folks go to it because dynamic layers are your friends when you want to jail off stuff from different machines. Um, and one of the other things is, are all the needed patches to kernel, et cetera, there? I made a boo-boo and I missed a kernel patch. And unfortunately, that kernel patch, had that been actually deployed, or that lack of a kernel patch, I would have bricked devices. So you really need to do a lot of review of all the patches here. And again, this could have been something that had we upstream first, or if this was even upstreamable, then we wouldn't have hit this. I don't think all of this was upstreamable. So, upstream as much as possible in the first place. Um, Now I will need to solve the longer term U-boot issues because, I don't want to be maintaining an old U-boot forever and ever in a day. So this means I have to figure out a way to update U-boot SPL and U-boot initial without bricking devices. And this is a tomorrow pitch problem or a next year summit talk. I have a few ideas of how I'm going to do this. I'm not positive. I invite comments and criticism and ideas because again, this is like if it was just you updating U-boot and not breaking anything, real easy. Updating U-boot with having that very, very solid, that's a little harder. So let's talk about the pull request for this. And I want to thank Corn and Steve, who were both on this call, for being the unfortunate people who had to do the review of this. This was a very large pull request. This was 250 commits, 4,000 lines, four different repositories, and you don't do it this way unless you have no choice. There were reasons that we had to do it in one single pull request. It's much better if you can to have a non-working Kirkstone branch with small incremental changes, and it's way easier to maintain and review than a massive pull request. So again, I want to give a special thanks to Stan.io. They let me talk about this. Corn and Steve, thank you for the review, and you should absolutely go see Corn's talk. To fetch or not fetch, automating Rust package dependency fetching in the Yocto CI system. Corn gives a good talk, so you should go see that. Questions, comments?
So did you brick ever?
I did not brick. I did not brick. I
Yay,
absolutely did not brick.
yay for that.
Yeah, CA for that. Steve and Corn actually caught this. I was missing a kernel patch that would have caused me to brick if it had gotten deployed to my test device, but it did not brick.
And
Okay,
this
well,
is
thank
why
you
we
so much.
review pull requests.
What'd you say? What'd you say, Steve? I hear Steve in the
This is
background.
this is why we review pull requests, is
Yes.
so we can catch each other.
Yes. Oh, yeah. No, if we all wrote clean code, we wouldn't have Bugzilla, right? We've written more bugs than we've written good code. So, no, this is and I cannot reiterate how much, especially on an update like this, how important a good review process is. Uh,
Yeah.
okay. Did I use the same Mender version or did you upgrade to newer Mender as well? I used newer Mender. Um, but so within it was kind of goofy how I did this. This was stupid, and like there's one way of doing it, and then there's another way of doing it. So because Mender's touching U-boot environmental variables, what I did was I took the um, U-boot community part for Dunfell, even though there was a Kirkstone branch, and forward ported it to Kirkstone, as opposed to taking the Kirkstone branch and just fixing it up for Dunfell or for the Dunfell memory layout. Um, Yeah, no devices were that. Yes, thank you, Steve. Do I recommend updating if not necessary? Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna say this. As a Yocto Project ambassador, yes, you should always update if you can. As someone who lives in the real world, if your device is sitting there not connected to the internet, no one has physical access to it. Who cares if it's running sumo, right? Yeah, Warrior to Scarf Gap. Jeez, that's yeah, yeah. No, Warrior to Scarf Gap is scary. Um, because yeah, like I would. That's actually really smart to do a interim step to Kirkstone. Um, that's definitely a smart move. Um, but yeah, unless your device is sitting under like 10 tons of concrete that's not connected to the internet. Yeah. So anyway, I think I'm on to the next presentation.
Yes, so yeah, please continue answering questions in the chat, but we do need to move to the last presentation.
Will do. All right.
Thank you so much, Pidge. That was excellent
You're welcome.
and entertaining and educational at the same time.